So good morning, afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm not sure where everybody is. And welcome to our last session of the day. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Sharon Jarvis. She's, correct me if I make any mistakes, please, Sharon, but she's a Métis who has been an educator for over 15 years in ELT and is currently teaching at University of British Columbia. Her areas of concentration while studying at
See ya.
Her areas of concentration while studying at University of British Columbia were in adult education and learning, Indigenous epistemologies and methodologies, educational psychology, and special education. A couple of recommendations or reminders I have to give you. The session will be recorded. There's zero tolerance for chat messages we see as racist or anti-LGBTQ at all. People here will be removed from the room without warning if that happens, okay? And having said that, the floor is yours, Sharon, please.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to get set up here.
Okay.
Just one sec here. So. Okay, so we're all set, looks like?
Yeah,
everybody?
perfect. Looks
It looks
perfect.
good on your end? Okay, perfect. Let me just make sure that I'm moving okay. Okay. So I'd like to just, first of all, begin with, where's my hands? Begin with the acknowledgement that I am on the land of the Coast Salish people and the Squamish, Stelo, the Tusuelith, and the Musqueam people, Musqueam nations. And I'd also like to thank the Teacher Development for Special Interest Group, SIG, and the International Association of Teachers of English as a Foreign Language, and Race and Queerness in ELT for you accepting my proposal. And so the title of this work is ELT Includes Indigenous Perspectives. And the terminology that I'm bringing forth is called Wakutwin, Opimshwak, and Ekichinantak, which is woe in short. And so essentially it transforms verbs to understand race and queerness. So I'll begin with a little bit of what you're to expect here. So I'll begin a little bit with my positioning, giving you a little bit of background on my Métis history, and then follow that up with some literature. And the literature is regarding adult learning and education, mostly because I'm proposing that this is a reason for bringing it into ELT. And then nextly, the methodology that whenever I'm doing any kind of work, research work, teaching, is an Indigenous methodology. So I'll be bringing that forth, and then I'll bring in this woe concept of a framework that I usually apply when I'm. For me, I usually apply it when I'm learning the Indigenous language, the Nahio language, which is a language that I'm trying to recover. So it's a little bit, so I've tried to use it for English here specifically for this. So it didn't sort of translate in the same way, but we'll see how it goes, what you think. And then like I said, I'll do a little bit of an application, and it turns out to be the be verb, and then we'll do a conclusion where we'll start making some connections, and then a bit of Q&A. So that's what we're in for. So I hope you're all interested. So as a Métis, there's this is sort of a medicine wheel that I have here. And you'll see here the MFW is where, and on the medicine wheel, this is the spring, this is where everything begins. And so essentially this is where we as a Métis people began to emerge in Canada. And so it's called the Montreal Fur Trading Wintering, and it's essentially around 1770. And so what happened here is the French fur traders, when they first arrived to their posts during the winter, those who actually lacked skills that could help them through the winter were sent out to the Indigenous camps to go for them to take care of them through the winter. And what would happen is the Indigenous men would embrace these French officers and whatnot and workers, and they would teach them the hunting skills, the survival skills, and be a part of the male community. And from there, then they would move over and be able to be introduced to the females, and essentially they would marry, or well, they jump a stick, whatever it was, and they go into these relationships. They call them country marriages. And from there, eventually these traders would leave the posts and then move in with the Indigenous community. And this is sort of the emergence of us as Métis. So the children were the product of these unions. And then, so then what happened here, now moving down into the summer part of the medicine wheel, we have the Battle of Seven Oaks in 1817. So this is another awareness of us as the Métis, is now we're sort of coming forth as, we're emerging, and we established this flag here. The infinity flag was the first flag, actually, first non-European flag ever to be raised in Canada. And that was during this time. And the reason why there was a battle is that the Hudson Bay Company decided that they were going to sell the land to Lord Selkirk. And so the Indigenous people were all like, what? How did this happen? Like, what's going on here? How can you do this? And so the battle occurred, and then they had their treaty settlements. However, the Métis people were left out of this. And then we move on to 1870, and in 1870, now Canada was confederating Canada. And so part of that was bringing this railroad through, and they were coming through, we're in Saskatchewan there, and they're coming through where we're living. And so the Métis people, again, like, what are you guys doing? We're living here. How can you do this? And so Louis Riel came out from back east, and he negotiated with the government for us, and we negotiated the province of Manitoba. And on a side note here, Manitoba is a Nahio word that means good vibe and spirit. But so anyways, so what happened there, we negotiated this province, and so things were going well. But then in 1885, now we're in the north part here of us Métis, is that the government reneged on the deal and the agreement, and they decided that they were going to change it up, and instead of giving us our province where we would all be together, because we're a Wakutuan people, which I'll share a little bit later. They tried to split us up all over the place, all over the Canada, in these little plots all over. And so we again we raised arms with the other Indigenous people who were pushing back on this confederation in 1885, and we lost. And so what happened, because we lost, is the Métis people, their guns were taken away from them. They could no longer hunt or fight back. And we essentially were buffalo hunters. And so we survived that kind of lifestyle. And so now we were starving because the buffalo were all gone. And we were the traders of Canada. And so we became the lowest of capital in the land. We had no social, no economic, no cultural. We had zero capital. And even the First Nations people, they had their reserves. They had a place. We were on the, what they call it, the road allowance. So we'd find places to sort of to live. And essentially we disappeared. We couldn't really, we weren't accepted in the Indigenous because we were white. We weren't accepted in the white because we were Indigenous. So the white community was sort of the elitist. So in order to sort of, a part of our survival was to start beginning to white ourselves out. And essentially, so that was it. In 1885, we no longer existed. And then now we go into the second ring. And in the second ring here, now it's a new life. I sort of describe it as the phoenix rising from the ashes. Is in 1982, the Canadian government recognized the Métis people in the Constitution as Aboriginal people. And those are the Indigenous of Canada. And then in 2003, they had a Pali case, and in the Pali case, in Sault Ste. Marie, there was some Métis people hunting, and they were arrested, and then it went to the courts. So they were saying, well, these are our hunting lands. Well, so they had to work this out because this is all sort of new. And so they decided that, okay, so a Métis person you self-identify as a Métis person, you have to have an ancestral connection, and you have to be accepted by the community. So now we're sort of identifying who we are as Métis people. And then in 2016, we had another case, the Daniels case, which lasted a very long time. And now our identity has changed again. Now we have to sort of show our, now we've become a race, I guess you could say, is we have to, it's a blood content, essentially. Now we're identified. Our identification now is in 1650 in Nova Scotia. So that kind of eliminates this 1770 history, and it's a process of eliminating this history here. And in eliminating this history here, now the government is in a different position of negotiating with us, and so politically it's a little bit problematic. But so essentially, that's who I am as a Métis person. I'll just show you this book here. I don't know if you can see it, but
no, when you're sharing oh yeah, we can.
Can you see it? Okay, so this is book, Heather Devine, she's written it. It was her research, after her research, and it's the people who own themselves. It's Heather Devine. And in that book, as I was reading it, the people that she identified were the same people that are in my family tree. So then I learned that actually my history is deep in all of that's happening here. So that's a little bit about who I am and as an Indigenous person. So here's the literature that I want to bring forth for you. Is I'm going to bring in UNESCO and UNDRIP, and then Transformative Learning and Critical Pedagogy, which are, all of these are connected with each other. So they're all working together. You got the governments here are sort of suggesting this is what we need to do, and then this is sort of how we do it. So UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, they brought forth a couple of landmark publications. And these landmark publications were the Farrar and the Dolores report. The Farrar report in 72 is Learning to Be and the World of Education Today and Tomorrow. And then the Dolores report is Learning, the Treasure Within, and that one was in 96. And then the latest report that UNESCO has brought forth is Rethinking Education Towards a Global Common Good. So Dolores and Farrar's report confirmed the role of UNESCO is an advocate of humanistic and utopian vision of education. And Alford, I cited this from Alford's 216 work, where she discusses Dolores and the Farrar reports. And essentially the Farrar report is, learning to be, and what they bring forth is the importance of ties between education and social progress. And then the Dolores, when they came along, they integrated the vision of education is based on two key concepts: learning throughout life and the 4 pillars of learning. 1 is to know, 2 to do, 3 to be, and 4 to live together. So essentially now UNESCO is education is, it's from the cradle to the grave now. So it's part of adult education, which is what I sort of mentioned here. But it's through your whole life. And then rethinking education towards a global common good, which is the latest work that they brought forth. What they've done is this draws on the Farrar report and it draws on the Dolores report, and the purpose of formulating a humanistic and universal vision of the future of education. So in this quote here, that's from Alford, is that lifelong education was at the heart of learning societies, in which the focus was no longer on schooling, educational institutions, and provision, but on the lifelong learning process of every individual. So essentially, education is not necessarily in the classroom. It's very fluid and dynamic. And all of this work, essentially all of this UNESCO work of these reports, were very strongly influenced by Farrar. So now UNDRIP, and with UNDRIP, it was again a United Nations Declaration of Rights for Indigenous People. And this image here is the BC, Canada here, implementing this UNDRIP into the BC government. So UNDRIP was adopted by the General Assembly on September 2007, with a majority of 144 states, with 4 abstaining, and then 11 abstentions. But eventually, the 4 that were against did come around, and now they're a part of it. And one of them was Canada, and the ones that were essentially the colonized countries. So UNDRIP is important to bring forth for the reason for Aboriginal knowledges to be brought into the classrooms around the world. And so there's 2 articles specifically that I want to point out. And Article 15 on page 14 of the UNDRIP is that Indigenous peoples have the right to dignity and diversity of their cultures, traditions, histories, and aspirations, which shall be appropriately reflected in education and public information. So essentially, this is kind of what I'm doing here. Anyways, and then Article 46, 3 on page 29, it says the provisions set forth in this declaration shall be interpreted in the accordance with principles of justice, democracy, respect for human rights, equality, non-discrimination, good governance, and good faith. So, so these are sort of the reasons of why we're bringing Indigenous perspectives into education, and essentially that connects with our queerness and mostly race, I guess, but it's more about, you know, accepting everybody and everything. So the transformative learning, which is part of this process, and I'm focusing more on Mesereau's 78, 81, and 97 work, is this process of change. There's individual change, and then there's social change. So what we're doing essentially is transformative learning is we're trying to change historical frames that had traditionally dismissed Indigenous frames. And Mesereau says, Mesereau says that he himself was inspired by Frere, Habermas, and others. So his work is really drawing on mostly on Habermas's work. And like, for example, Mesereau in 81, he brings these three generic areas of human interest, which is the technical, the practical, and then the emancipatory. So those are the three tenets, I guess, of transformative learning. The technical is, you know, the traditional, which is the instrumental learning that we, you know, normally do in classes, the cause and effect, and you know, the empirical learning process. And then the communicative is more of, you know, the part of inquiry. It's the feelings, it's the emotions, and it's you know, the intersubjectivity, understanding meaning. And so that essentially Habermas refers this to the historical human hermeneutic of sciences. And partly what this process is, you know, is the ethnographic kind of learning and literary learning, and really trying to interpret the meaning of what you're learning. And then lastly, the part that Mesereau is really responsible for bringing forth in this learning is that emancipatory part that he sort of identified. I guess it's, you know, it's been happening, but he sort of recognized it, and, you know, this disorientating dilemma that we face. And I sort of see that for, like, with, you know, within the classroom, this disorientating dilemma would be like a student who's, you know, like maybe comes from a culture that within their language, there's the honorific part within their language, and they're, you know, they can't address an older sibling, an older person by name, and then they learn English, and all of a sudden they can do this like that. It would be like, what, you know? So there's this dilemma. Now I've got two ways of looking at this. So now you have to sort of explore, like, okay, now what does this mean, and self-reflect on it, and self-knowledge, and then sort of explore your own history and your biography individually and your cultural, and then sort of make some decisions on how you're going to navigate this dilemma that you're now facing. In the classroom, sort of a way of bringing forth this transformative process would be, it involves, you know, working with metaphors. And personally, the psychoanalysis part is the free writing process. And then from that free writing process, then you start moving it more towards a narrative and a biography or a histography. And this is a way to sort of see yourself and your role and your social expectations. And so this is part of what the transformative learning is somewhat like. And then of course, then we have the critical pedagogy of Freire, his Freirean work. And with Freirean, he's, you know, of course, he's talking about this banking model of the hegemony of, you know, depositing into the students your perspective. And historically, it's, you know, for us as Indigenous people, it has been, you know, this deposit of the Western frame is this is the way we have to think and do, which was, you know, the opposite of what, mostly opposite of our understanding of learning. And Freirean and calls it was the instrument of oppression. And so essentially within the critical pedagogy, the process here is, you know, you sort of gather these generative themes of people's hopes and doubts and the challenges. So as, you know, within the classroom, the educator is, you know, you're actively listening to what is the consensus here with your class of any kind of issues that they might be facing or thinking about. And then of course you reflect it back to them. But within Freire's perspective, he was, you know, it was like he had his professionals out there. He had the social workers, he had the psychologists, the socialists, socialized, and then he also had the teachers, and they were all out there within the community, engaging and building relationships with the community and just trying to hear what they're saying, and then they would report back to within their own little group, and then they'd also have somebody from their community and try to sort of discuss, okay, what are we hearing, and then they reflect it back to the people, and through codification, by building a picture for them, maybe give them image of it or some kind of word or something for them to sort of reflect on what the, you know, what is their, you know, their oppression essentially. And then and then from there, you've got this codification, and then you have the process of decodifying it, and the decodifying that involves the dialogical process of, you know, of talking about this and critically reflecting on it. And within this dialogue, though, it's very, very important that you have, you know, and this is probably maybe the key part is this trust. Is how do you build this trust within the classroom and this mutual respect within whatever setting it is that you're in, and that is actually a very key factor for any of this to work. And then, of course, you know, Freirean calls this the Easter experience, which is essentially what Mesereau calls this disorientating dilemma. And it's that conscientization, you know, this critical awareness of your social reality. And then from there, we have to move. Then from there is you're moving towards praxis. And the praxis, of course, is the action that is informed and linked with your values, and you sort of gain knowledge of your social reality. And but this is you have to act on this. It's not just something that this knowledge that you gain. There has to be action, and you take it out in the environment, and you act on it, and then you critically reflect, and through this reality, you start moving towards this transformation. And of course, this you action critical reflect, this iterative process is sort of done. So that's essentially a bit of the literature on bringing these Indigenous perspectives into the classroom. And so now I'm moving on to the methodology. So this is, you know, an Indigenous way of sort of doing anything, you know, like research, teaching. It's just a process. And part of it is essentially we decolonize and, you know, set out, change the order of the world, which is what Fanon brought forth. And for us, we're trying to recover ourselves, and we're rewriting and to rewrite. So what's happened is, ethnographers have been writing about us as Indigenous people and who we are. They've been saying what our values are, and all of these, this information, which as Indigenous people are going into the universities, we're reading this material and reflecting on what our lived lives is, and finding out, whoa, this is not who we are. And so now we're, but this has been going on now. I think it's starting to change a bit on who we are as Indigenous people. We are starting to become more empowered. But initially, when Smith was bringing out this work, it was just, we're on this, just beginning to recover ourselves. But another aspect, of course, within Indigenous methodology is that you have to have the four R's, and that was respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. So those considerations when in anything that you're doing always have to be present. And then, of course, the positioning of who we are is an important part of Indigenous methodology. As an Indigenous person, when I'm in an Indigenous community, you always have to know where you're from and who you're from. That's the first part of our introductions, so that then we get the relationships can now start to sort of form. And whenever we're doing like any kind of work, of course, it's relational accountability. And I think that's what we're seeing with the queerness here is, they have a relational accountability to their community, and especially within the race. And then this is something that I don't know how, I think this is this research is ceremony. I don't know how people will take this part, but so before, like if I'm doing research or I'm doing any kind of work, there's this ceremony that has to be engaged with, along with all the others that I mentioned here. And the ceremony is that it's, part of it is acknowledgement, part of it is gifting, and then you go out and you seek advice. So maybe in a Western frame would be your mentor, but we would, from an Indigenous perspective, we would, maybe leave some tobacco, bring some tobacco to an elder, and then ask an elder a question or something. How I've used this in a classroom is, or I guess not really a classroom because we're outside, but how I've used this is, we go through a number of processes, this transformative learning thing and this free writing process, and sort of learning how to hang up your judgments, and we go through that kind of process, and then eventually we move towards going an activity where we would we go out into nature, and we begin with the ceremony, and we bring some tobacco, and then the tobacco is just a process that you sort of go through, and you would leave the tobacco maybe at the tree and for a rock or something, and you would, and then you could leave it. I might be ahead of myself here, but but anyways, this is what I do, and then you'd leave it with the whatever it is that you're sort of seeking knowledge from, and then you can ask it a question, and then you sort of work through this methodology or this framework that I sort of been bringing forth here. I don't know where you guys are now. I hope I'm not losing any of you. I'm pretty quiet.
We're all still here, but we're chatting away in the chat box. So.
Oh, okay.
We're all here, and Tyson is giving links to some of the concepts and references you're making.
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay. So essentially, this Indigenous framework, I personally working through that process that I just mentioned, what came out was these Wakutuan, Opimchuak, and Ekichinantak. And this is essentially, these are words that describe a Métis person or our Métis community. And it's also, I guess, our Indigenous community. So Wekutuan is all my relations. So when I mentioned earlier that I would we would give some tobacco to a tree, that is because in the Indigenous frame, everything has life, everything participates, and we respect everything. So we believe that everything is, we can engage with it, has a mind, and panpsychism looks into this from the Western frame, but essentially that's sort of a perspective that we have. So when you're in a Wekutuan frame, and I don't know what it would be like, you know, I think it might be difficult for someone in a Western frame to really understand this, but you're engaged with everything, and everything's participating in all that you're doing. And then a Pimchwak is this self-determining, and the government actually called it, it's in the Supreme Court, is when they were identifying the Métis people, one word that they gave us, where we were a Pimchwak, which means their own boss, because, you know, we were sort of on our own there. And then Ekichinantak is respectfulness, and it's, you know, the good way. And essentially Ekichinantak is the inter and intra intelligence. So it's a competence. So so when as a Métis, when I'm working as a Métis, I'm not dominantly in a First Nations frame, and I'm not dominantly in a Western frame. I have to work through both of those frames, and they have to marry. And through this, then I can understand what's happening here. So this sort of came from a Western frame of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and Ryan and Deasy's self-determination theory. And so bringing in their ideas. So Ryan and Deasy essentially is autonomy, relatedness, and competence. And so bringing in their ideas, and then these ideas that I was finding from the Métis literature, this framework emerged. But the difference is the Western frame is more linear, more individual, whereas this frame is more collective. But specifically what stood out was I had to sort of find this Ekichinantak, because it's I knew from the Western frame what their measurement of competence would actually contradict an Indigenous frame of competence. So I knew I had to find out what this was. And this Ekichinantak, which is a Nehio, there's research done, and it's a Nehio perspective of competence. And, you know, it's the good way and the relationships. And so that's how in an Indigenous community, your competence is measured. Whereas with self-determination theory, with Ryan and Deasy, the competence, of course, was measured by your cognitive dominantly is, you know, how fast you can do a puzzle, how accurate you can do a puzzle. So it was, you know, dominantly, that's how they were measuring competence, how competent you feel. So so that's a little bit about this framework. So given what I've shared about the Indigenous methodology and this concept, so now, and then how the ceremony, so then I move into the question. So and, you know, so I've done my processes of the ceremony and giving thanks and offering gifts. And I have to mention this too, is from a Métis perspective, we are very non-dogmatic in anything that's going on within the ceremony and whatnot. And in my past work, I think 2019, is that what came forth through this process was essentially from the Métis, it has to be, it's the heart. You come from the heart, and that's sort of where you're making your decisions, instead of these strict dogmatic ways of doing things, even with a medicine wheel, and, you know, nothing's I don't know, in stone, I guess. So anyways, the question is where and how do we connect? So now normally when I do this process, I use this methodology. I am actually working to engage with the Nehio language, because I'm trying to, revive my language. But for this purposes, we're in English. So I tried to transfer it into English and see what happens. So this is what came forth asking these questions. I'm a little embarrassed about it because it's not quite the same as when I do it from, Nehio words, but anyways, here it is. So essentially, where do we connect? What came forth was, because of teaching English. So I had to sort of have this sort of aspect of teaching English. And, and part of teaching English is, your verbs and your pronouns. And so this is a very basic level. And so this is sort of what happens here. So I looked at it from the past, and here in the past, and this is way, you can be teaching like they need to know, how these verbs differentiate depending on the subject. So here we can see that I in the past, I and the gender they're the same, they're equal. And then we can see that the you and the you, so sometimes it's in a singular form and sometimes it's in a plural form, but it's connected with we and they. And then when we move to the present, we see that that I has now become more of it's set apart from the genders of he, she, and it. And then of course you and they are still together. But then when we go into the future, which is, see, now I'm smiling, right? is in the future, we're all equal. It's all equal. And so essentially that's what we connect. The connection comes in the future, and in the future we're equal, and that's sort of hopeful, I guess, is sort of the presentation that I'm hoping that comes here. So what we've done here is we looked at the role of education. Just a sec, I can't see my notes here because you got the thing here. I think it would just wait. Okay, so essentially we looked at the role of education from the perspective of UNESCO and UNDRIP and Transformative Learning and Critical Pedagogy. And so what we've learned here is that education is lifelong, personally reflective, socially reflective, transformative, and it's an inclusiveness of society and citizens. And then the methodology is the Indigenous methodology is about rewriting, and RIGHT and WRIT, the world, right? And we're essentially, as Indigenous people, we're recovering ourselves and we're recovering our community. And we're trying to find out who we are, and this, to know who we are, and this includes our community. So that's part of this methodology, even with the people in your classroom, is it's important that they're able to when they're learning the language, that they have to be able to sort out, what is it about this new language, this new culture that I'm learning, that that I want to, you know, bring forth with, bring them together. So essentially not leave behind any of their past, future, that they may, you know, some valuable parts of their culture. They don't want to be leaving that behind. So part of this methodology is and the transformative and the critical pedagogy is essentially to sort of not let the English language or culture take over. So with this, the conceptual work of this WOE conceptual work is working with the inanimate, and it helps bring forth metaphors, and the metaphors are help us to in our transformation process, and also too is it's bringing forth that the inanimate, you know, they want respect too, and they want autonomy. So I laugh because I'm not sure, you know, some people maybe, you know, if I'm with an Indigenous community, it's really easy to talk like this, but outside that community, I'm not sure what the response is. And so in applying this, like I said, I'm normally using this kind of application because I'm trying to learn the Nehio language. And when I'm using this process, usually what happens is there'll be a word will come forth, a Nehio word. And from that, then I do the research on that word, what it means and how it connects with me and all that. And then I'm really engaging, you know, I really learn this language. It's a slow process, but it's a way of learning language. So in conclusion, in the conclusion that I got here, the hierarchy is dominance of the individual. So yeah, we sort of see that there's a bit of a hierarchy here in this part here, is the individual is more important than the collective. And for me, that's problematic. I like it if we're all equal, you know, it just helps bring everything together better. So that's essentially my talk here. And so I guess maybe a question I could ask is, you know, like, where and how do you see us connecting? Where are we, you know, where we connect, we are where we are now and here. And we also have to understand this whole process of learning is a lifelong learning, you know, where it's not something that's just a one-off, and it is an iterative process. Questions? Sorry, I rambled on. I just felt so I
was going to give you the 5-minute warning, but your timing is perfect, Sharon.
Okay.
Everybody is absolutely blown away by the verb to be metaphor, and that nobody had ever thought of that before.
Really? Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Because I thought, oh, I don't know where this is going to go.
It was very, very beautiful. Can you please stop sharing your screen so that we can?
There you go.
That's great.
All right.
I think this will be the best way, Sharon, for everybody to sort of interact now that we can see each other. So if you want to turn on your cameras or unmute yourselves to have some discussion about or questions.
Just trying to find you guys here, just a sec. There you are. Okay, so I'm good. Here we go. So you want me to unmute? You want me to mute myself, or?
No. I was talking to everybody else.
To create a dialogue. Do we have any questions? You had asked a question in earlier on, Ty. Do you want to ask Sharon?
Gosh, which question did I ask earlier on?
How much can we acknowledge and capitalize on learning from outside the classroom?
Oh yes, it was a point earlier on in your talk. I mean, not the one that blew my mind, which was most recently, but the non-blow my mind one, which is where my question came from, was about the fact that most learning doesn't happen inside the classroom; it happens outside the classroom. And so I was spitballing when I said, how can we as teachers capitalize on that fact that the learning happens outside the classroom, because we're so entrenched in what we do in the classroom as the thing that we can control and the thing where the students' learning actually happens. But in fact, it happens all over the place. And I was curious about your perspective.
Oh, gee. Yeah, I can only think of, that you have to have maybe that when they come back to the classroom is maybe ask some questions, have some, some kind of engagement. I personally, I really like the free writing process of free writing. When I like that is something that's really important for me to teach people how to do in the class. And in English language, in any class, English language learning or any other kind of class, is that it's really important for them to learn this free writing process. And then from there, usually, you can pose a question or not pose a question. Normally, I don't like to pose a question. I normally like it that they would just free write, just with nothing. And then, and then sort of maybe go back to it and identify what kind of themes sort of emerge from that. And then that can be moving towards the direction that they want to be going, or sort of something that's coming, it's sort of coming out of your subconsciousness is essentially what it's supposed to be, right? And so I think essentially is maybe working through a process maybe like that, and then get them to sort of discuss. Maybe they can start working towards discussing what has come out, and that may be what they're learning. Does that make sense?
I have, yeah, that does. I have a colleague in particular who is very much interested in community-based learning options. And one aspect of that is water-based pedagogy and land-based pedagogy. So she actually takes her classes out onto the local rivers and waters and to learn about the area in which we live, and to be able to talk about that in a second language and acknowledge that is a very different approach compared to what we normally do, right?
I think it's more, they call it, there's land-based and there's another one. Oh, the land-based, I think, is more of a Western approach, and and then the indigenous is, I can't remember it, but it's land something else. But but essentially getting back to the land, like the land is, from it would be, I would say it is indigenous because that's where our language comes from. Jan Hare is the one who was sort of telling me that's sort of what she's sort of shared with me, is that, the indigenous languages come from the land. And so we, like even with this conceptual framework is that you're allowing this inanimate to speak to you, right? And then, so that's essentially where the language comes from. So I would think that would be an indigenous, working towards an indigenous approach to learning.
Sharon, Catherine asks whether UNDRIP is legally binding.
Oh, good question. Well, I think on my slide there, I had British Columbia has brought it into our government. So it is, it's sort of the countries, all of these countries have agreed that this is 144 countries who are members of the UN have agreed to adopt this. And then it's just this ongoing process of making it part of the legal system. And so British Columbia here in Canada, we've adopted this as part of our government protocol. So I guess it would depend, right, on different government. Like even like if you sort of take the word Métis, right, just what the word Métis is, it's evolving. You know, it's always at different court systems. We, you know, who we are as people changes, right? So it's kind of maybe the same thing.
Okay, do we have any other questions? But I think we can wrap it up, and we're doing beautifully with time. So thank you so much, Sharon. It was truly a very inspiring and thought-provoking keynote for me. There were so many, but I never thought about so many of the little things that you brought on from the Indigenous methodology. I'd never thought, and that speak to my heart, and that I really enjoyed it. I got a few things that I'm going to look into. So thank you very much for that. And I'm going to pass the floor on to Mr. Seaburn to do the closing.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, and so much, Sharon. I have one question. Why is your name Sunju?
Well, I was just trying to create another Gmail account, and just you know how you just one for that you don't want any connection to, and so it was just.
Oh, I see. Happened. Okay, so nothing about.
There's no thought taken.
Okay,
no
gotcha.
thought to it at all.
I won't spend any more time on it then. Great. So thank you so much, Sharon. Anyway, we so rarely are, I guess, exposed is the only word I can say to an Indigenous talk or a focus talk at a conference. And while people are not necessarily from Canada, and there's a nice history lesson there, it's something unusual, and it should be more usual. So I really appreciate the lesson leading up to the blow my mind moment, which was the be verb thing, frankly.
Was it really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, just I don't think any of us had really thought about. Well, I'm speaking for everybody. I'm sorry, I don't mean to do that, but about the hierarchy or even the relationship of the I and the gendered pronouns in the past, and then not so in the present, and then all in the future. Like just that whole thing. Frankly, it makes me want to look at every bit of language now with a different lens.
Good, thanks. I'm glad it was something, because it's not normally what happens when I apply this, but.
Well, I look forward to going to a session that is normal for you then. So for everybody else, first of all, I would like to thank you for coming today. It's been quite a day in the making, and I'm very glad that it has panned out the way it has. Yeah. Tomorrow we have another full day ahead of us, which starts an hour earlier. So you're welcome, Vancouver people. And it starts with plenary, our last keynote, which is Elizabeth Coleman. And we have a bunch of sessions on both tents again tomorrow. So please do come. And then finally, I would like to say that I strongly appreciate all of the donations actually that have been coming in from the different individuals, whether they're here or not at this moment. The participant chosen charity selection will be revealed tomorrow. And so we will decide where this money goes tomorrow. So hopefully you can please attend that. And I think we'll wrap up today. Rose, do you have anything to add?
No, nothing to add. Thanks. I'll just see everybody tomorrow, I hope. Okay, great. Have an excellent Saturday, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.